Good morning. My name is Michael Carlin, as you heard, and it's my privilege to serve as the chair of the U.S. Water Alliance Board. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the other board members in the room, and I can't see them because these lights are so bright, but if they could stand up and we can give them a round of applause, I would appreciate it. So welcome to the One Water Summit 2019 in beautiful Austin, Texas. 4 years ago, we had about 200 people in the room. Now we have over 950 attending the summit today. It's truly amazing that, yes, thank you. What's truly amazing is that we have 550 first-timers. So thank you all first-timers for coming. We really appreciate it, and I hope to see you next year. Over to 18 months. This is the only convening in the country where everyone, from utility staff to farmers, to artists, to environmentalists, to social justice activists, come together under one roof, and we're going to hear from all of them over the next day and a half. We're going to share our vision and ideas for what it's going to take to put us on the path towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous water future. The growth and diversity of the summit would not have been possible without our tremendous leadership of our CEO, Radhika Fox, and our talented team, staff team. So please give them a round of applause. As we kick off our opening plenary, we wanted to start by acknowledging the land we are on and the First Nation that had lived here. Unfortunately, Dr. Mario Garza, founder of the Indigenous Cultural Institute, is unable to join us today due to a health issue. Dr. Garza sends his regrets. Some of you have probably met Dr. Garza yesterday on the San Marcos Springs tour and understand the important work that he is championing. We wish Dr. Garza a speedy recovery. So to continue our program, I'd like now to introduce our CEO, Radhika Fox.
Good morning. How are you? You guys look beautiful. Just beautiful. Good morning. I am Radhika Fox. I'm the CEO of the U.S. Water Alliance, and I want to join Michael in welcoming you to the One Water Summit. We are really thrilled to be here in the heart of Texas because there's a wonderful One Water story happening here. So before anything else, I got to do a couple shout outs to all the people that made the One Water Summit possible. First, I want to thank my board of directors for their strategic direction and guidance on everything we do at the Alliance. I also have to thank the staff of the U.S. Water Alliance. They are total rock stars. So if you see anyone with a staff badge today, will you give them a fist bump or a smile or a thank you just to let them know how much you appreciate them? I also want to thank the staff here at the JW Marriott and at the Hampton Inn. They have been wonderful on-site partners in all the planning that we've had to do to pull this off. So thank you, everyone. I also want to thank all of the sponsors that made the One Water Summit possible. So the U.S. Water Alliance, we're a small nonprofit organization, and we're completely dependent on our sponsors to be able to pull off the summit. So first, I'd like to thank our 2019 Leader Circle. Our Leader Circle generously support multiple program areas and really partner with us in program development. So I want to thank the foundation and corporate partners for their support. I also would love to thank the gold sponsors who are really underwriting the summit experience that we're all having together over the next couple of days. And I would love to thank our silver sponsors as well for their support of One Water Summit. So could you all give a round of applause to our corporate and foundation partners? Next, I want to thank our local host partners, Austin Water, the City of Austin's Department of Watershed Protection, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. You know, when we first came to Texas, people said, people go big here, and we had a big planning team of folks from all across the state that really made the summit possible. I know so many people enjoyed the site visits yesterday, and a lot of the content that you're going to experience is really because of the engagement with so many Texas water leaders. So can you thank Texas for hosting us? So, I don't say this is not like a thing to say, this is really true, that the One Water Summit is really my favorite 3 days of the year. Really, I know you think I'm such a water nerd, but it is. It is. I like it better than my birthday. More. I do. I like it more than my wedding anniversary. And don't tell Jamie. For those who know Jamie, don't tell him that. But really, the summit is my favorite 3 days of the year because it's 3 days that I get to spend with 1,001 water change makers from across the country. And so I want to tell you who's in the room with you today. As Michael said, half of you are first timers. And we hope that after Friday, you will be a repeat offender at our next summit. We have about 235 cities and towns from all across the country in the room. We have 46 states and provinces represented here today, and we have 44 One Water delegations. These are delegations that form from regions all across the country. Tomorrow they're going to be making some incredible commitments to action, and then they're going to go home, and they are really the boots on the ground implementing One Water each and every day. So I want to give a shout out to the 44 One Water delegations. So when I look out on this amazing room of people, I truly believe that you are the One Water movement. You are the people who are transforming how we view and manage and organize around water systems all across the country. And like every movement in history, we are all charged with the duty to take tomorrow's challenges, to address them, and to usher in a brighter tomorrow. And when we look at the water sector, we face many, many challenges, right? We have hidden challenges, out-of-sight challenges like the aging water and sewer infrastructure that lies beneath our feet. We also face really visible challenges like the recent Hurricane Dorian and the increasing severe storms that we face all around the country. Or the fires in the Amazon that hold 1/5 of the world's fresh water. And then there are those challenges that really weigh heavy on my heart. The political divisions, the growing lack of trust in our public institutions. I know that you feel that too. But you all make me still feel full of hope, because in this room, we have all of the knowledge, all of the solutions, all of the relationships that we need to transform water in America. And so I hope that you will use these next 2 days to really figure out how we're going to move forward together, how we are going to find the we in water. So in 2016, the U.S. Water Alliance released our One Water Roadmap. It was really built with our members all around the country. And we were trying to do 2 things with that One Water framework. One, we wanted to give the nation a way to think about and organize the solutions that they were driving for water management, and it's organized around 6 arenas for action. But we also wanted the roadmap to be a call to action to all stakeholders to come together and to co-create solutions. And when I look in this room, when I look around the room, I mean, you all are answering that call to action each and every day. And I want to highlight a couple of those things that I'm looking forward to hearing more about in the next 2 days that we have together. So we know that to secure our nation's water future, we need to have more reliable and resilient water utilities. And part of that is because we know that 93% of climate stress is experienced as water stress, right? Whether it's droughts, chronic urban flooding, extreme storms. And so that's why later today, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Kevin Schaefer from Milwaukee. He has helped Milwaukee develop a comprehensive water resilience plan. They are, for example, doing an $80 million flood protection project, but they are engaging with the community to make choices around how those resources are going to be spent. They're even engaging with community health centers in that work. So what's happening in Milwaukee right now, it's about utility resilience and community resilience coming together. It's finding the we. That's what's happening in Milwaukee. We also have to think about how we're managing water in our cities and our towns, because 80% of the population in this country live in cities, whether they're big or small. And so I just got to give it up for the wonderful hosts here in Austin. During the plenary session that's about to follow, you're going to hear the full story. But to just give you a preview, a few years ago, Austin experienced a terrible drought. And they could have taken a zero-sum approach where each community was fighting for their water. But they actually rose to the challenge and said, we're going to do things differently. We are going to commit together to diversifying our local water supplies. And the City Council recently adopted a 100-year integrated water resources management plan. And that plan really emerged out of a grassroots community up project. It happened because we had advocates like Jennifer Walker with the Texas Living Waters Project really calling for solutions. Thank you. Yes, Jennifer. And I love it when people clap for people who get shout outs, so please do that. And it also happened because Greg Mazzaros, who runs Austin Water, really said, I'm going to listen to this, and we're going to come up and we're going to co-create the solution. So that is Greg and Jennifer finding the we in water here in Austin. I also believe that we have to work with the private sector and that they're a critical part of the solution, because I can't imagine a sustainable water future where we aren't building new business models, where we're not working with market forces that are aligned with the values of One Water. And so that's why I'm looking forward to hearing from Charlene Lorig, who is starting a new effort here called Texas Water Trade. They're building a marketplace here that's going to enable water utilities, businesses, landowners, and other water rights holders to pursue water transactions. Now that might seem super nerdy or dorky, right? But when you think about the fact that in Texas, the population is going to double in the next 3 decades, unless we have water markets that are working for all those people, we're going to have serious challenges. So, thank you for that effort, Charlene. One of the highlights for me every year at the summit is the fact that we have water managers and farmers in a room together. And we all know that that relationship is often adversarial. But if we are going to find solutions to things like the hypoxic dead zone that is the size of the state of Connecticut in the Gulf of Mexico right now, it's going to require collaboration between water and agriculture. And that's why I am just so thrilled to partner with Roger Wolf at the Iowa Soybean Association. He has led a really amazing delegation from Iowa that also includes Ag Secretary for Iowa, Mike Naig. And I wanted to share something. I was in Iowa earlier this year, and Mike said something to me that I feel like I want to say to this entire group. That water and ag are both undervalued in society, and we both feel the pressures of low prices. But together, we are stronger. So that is... And we're not going to achieve the vision of One Water unless all people and all communities share in the benefits of water management decisions. For me personally, one of the most rewarding projects that I've had an opportunity to work on this year is to help facilitate something called the Detroit Water Affordability Study Group. It brings together Gary Brown, the head of Detroit Water and Sewer, and Monica Lewis-Patrick, co-founder of We the People of Detroit. And we have had some really tough conversations. We have really been clear on the areas of disagreement, but we have also widened the lane of agreement around how we're going to solve the affordability challenge in Detroit. And so I'm really thrilled that tomorrow Gary Brown is going to be sharing with us a new customer service pledge, making official some of those policy ideas that were surfaced from that study group. So I really think that Detroit will be on the path to a more equitable water future. And finally, healthy watersheds, because no other arena can succeed without this one succeeding. And so we are really thrilled today to welcome the inaugural Chesapeake Bay delegation to the One Water Summit. Jamie Baxter has brought an amazing group of utility directors and philanthropy and community-based organizations who are all working in very different ways around preserving, protecting, restoring this most treasured water body. And so thank you for that work. So the last thing I want to say before we turn to our Texas One Water Plenary is just to say that I'm really grateful for all of you. I mean, I just want to acknowledge that the work that we are all doing is hard work. And I know I sometimes feel like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there's challenges, and it's slow going, and it's hard to get this stuff to stick. It's hard to implement all of the things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days. But you are doing that. And, I was recently asked this question: did you choose water, or did water choose you? And I know what everyone's answer to that question would be, but I know that you all chose to be here today. I know that you are choosing to be courageous around the work that you do in water back home. And so I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for doing that hard work. Thank you for bringing your time and talent into the JW Marriott for the next 2 days. And I am just looking forward to the discussion. So again, thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. So now it is my honor to transition us to the Texas One Water story, and to really root ourselves in that and to kick us off is Mayor Steve Adler from Austin. I actually had the opportunity to have a dinner with Mayor Adler about 2 years ago. We were both at something called Infrastructure Week in DC and ended up sitting next to each other at this dinner. And when I said I was with the U.S. Water Alliance and that we'd be coming to Austin soon, he was incredible. He just rattled off all of the things that Austin Water was doing, that the Department of Watershed Protection, how engaged the City Council was. He is a true water champion. So Mayor, welcome to the One Water Summit, and please tell us about all the great things happening here.
Well, I have the pleasure and the honor and the opportunity to welcome you all to Austin, Texas. We think this is a magical city with a really special spirit and soul. It's a city that really prioritizes this subject and your mission and your work. So I also want to take the opportunity to welcome each of you home. I understand that you've had a chance to, some of you last night, to see some of the things that we have here in Austin, and so many of them relate back to water. Our 2nd Street District, the Lady Bird Wildflower Center, Waller Creek, and Barton Springs. Water's always been a big part of this city, and it was mentioned the drought that we were in. When I got elected to this office 5 years ago, I came in with virtually an entirely new city council. We were being shown at that point multi-billion-dollar solutions to our drought that involved choices that we didn't want to make, piping water in from distant aquifers. But yet we were in the middle of this drought. The very first thing that this new council and I did when we got elected and got sworn in was we made it rain. We filled up the lakes. I wish I could repeat that and knew exactly what we did to make that happen, but it took that pressure off for that moment, but it did point out to us that we had real significant challenges, and if we didn't start thinking about water differently and more proactively and more sustainably, we could easily be back there again. Make sure that while you're in Austin, you appreciate the fact that we are the live music capital of the world. Everybody's applauding but Nashville, I can tell. No, but there are probably about 250 live music venues across this city tonight, tomorrow night, into the weekend, every weekend that you can find. So just some really, really great music. Make sure you eat some barbecue. Make sure you get some breakfast tacos from the trucks. We do have the best breakfast tacos in the world. Don't believe San Antonio, they lie. But water is important. I got here myself 40 years ago. I came here, I grew up in Washington, D.C., went to college outside of New York, came to Austin to go to law school because the cheapest law school in the country with no no intent of staying in this city. 45 minutes after I landed at the airport here for the first time, friends of mine who lived here took me to Barton Springs. And I found myself in that pool of water, which is the spiritual center, the heart of this city. And in that moment, 45 minutes, first being in Austin, in that place, I felt like I would never leave, and I didn't. Make sure you see Barton Springs. Make sure you go about 6 blocks away from here and walk into our brand new library. Time Magazine just listed it as one of the top 100 places to visit in the world. Gives you a new vision for what the libraries of the next generation would look like. But you'll keep coming back to the water as you walk around downtown. You know, legend has it that Mirabeau Lamar, who was president of the Republic of Texas, found himself just a couple blocks north of where we are right now, although there weren't blocks at that point, it was just hills. The legend has it that he chased and then shot the biggest buffalo anyone had ever seen. Of course, this is Texas, and that was in a different age. But he shot the buffalo and then looked up and saw the Colorado River Valley, the Texas Colorado River, not the other one. The river valley, and looked to his right and saw Shoal Creek, and looked to his left and saw Waller Creek, and it was beautiful, and he decided that this should be the capital of this new empire. A huge battle between him and Sam Houston, his predecessor in office, about whether or not President Lamar should be able to move the capital of Texas to Austin. Former President Houston had a different city in mind. Austin won. Lamar moved the capital here, and it's been here ever since. But it was that vista and that view that he describes, and those watermarks as the reason why he wanted to make this the capital of Texas. We know that we are dependent to an undue degree on that Colorado River. We dam it, we get power from it. Upstream, it's where our water, the drinking water comes from. Last year, we had an additional major challenge coming from the repercussions of climate change. We had intense storms and runoff in our city. Amazing amount of water fell in absolutely the wrong place and the wrong soil just upstream. It clouded our water supply, and we ended up having to do a water boil in our city, which you don't ever think is going to happen in a city of this size. Kind of like the U.S. Water Alliance is a day without water, except we had a week of that in our city. It was coincidental, but entirely appropriate, that at that same time we were in the process of proving our groundbreaking 100-year water supply plan, Water Forward, that I think you all are going to be hearing from our city manager and water department about here next. We're just really proud of that work, of the work of our water department, Austin Water, the members of the Water Forward Task Force, because it was something that really bubbled up from and involved our community at large. Leaders in our environmental community like Environment Texas, and others in this city, and I want to thank you, wherever you are in this room, for helping to educate our city on the importance of this issue. It's going to harness our increase in water use to create a really self-reliant water source. It's going to store surface water for future use. It's going to utilize water from floods, because we are in a flood-prone area. It's going to protect our precious water supplies. It's going to ensure that Austinites have drinking water well into the future. Just as a side note, I'd point out, you're living in a city where the citizens have taxed themselves in elections to the tune of almost $200 million to buy land at the aquifer and source points for Barton Springs, to leave the land fallow so as to ensure that that water is always clear and clean and crisp. We're just really excited that you guys are here in this number, on this mission, with this goal, on this subject, in this city. It fits. This is where this conference belongs. Welcome to Austin, Texas.
Thank you so much, Mayor Adler. Now I would like to welcome to the stage Scott Tong. He's a reporter with Marketplace Radio who is going to be moderating the next session. And just thank you to the partnership with American Public Media for the summit.
Great. Well, great privilege to be here with you. I'm going to introduce the panel well, I'll have them come up as I talk to you, and I have to say it is a great privilege to be here. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm out here with, I'm told, kind of 900 water experts and professionals and 4 great experts. Come on up as who are going to join me in this conversation. So as I kind of did a little bit of the math, we may have a couple thousand years of accumulated water experience and expertise in the room, and the non-water expert has the microphone. What could possibly go wrong? So I'm going to try to stay out of the way and try to facilitate a conversation to kind of prompt and provoke and ask you to tell a little bit of the Texas story, the Texas journey, as Radhika has mentioned here. So here's what we'll do. We have 44 minutes and 42 seconds, and I'm going to introduce each of you, and then my job, again, is to be the jargon police, to kind of move the conversation along and to have you try to talk to what it's really like here in the trenches. And this is a tough challenge, right? And what you've learned, what you're learning, what's easy, what's hard about this. I mean, these are your people here, and what can people from other parts of the country kind of learn from what's happening here in Austin and here in Texas. So let me first introduce who's in front of me here. To my far left is Spencer Cronk. He is the city manager. Go ahead, you can greet him. He's the Spencer's the city manager of the city of Austin, and before he came to Austin about, a year and a half ago or so?
Correct, yep.
Spencer was the Minneapolis city coordinator, and he directed the management of the Minneapolis city government by assisting the mayor and the city council in defining city policy. And before he worked for the state of Minnesota, Spencer worked as the executive director of organizational development and a senior advisor for the Department of Small Business Services for the city of New York. So thank you, Spencer, for joining us. Next to Spencer is Earthia Nance. She is our engineer and academic and public policy observer on the panel. She is with Texas Southern University. She is associate professor of environmental planning, registered professional civil engineer, and you have done research and writing from around the world. So part of your expertise is on the Texas story, but beyond, a fascinating book about Brazil. Her current research addresses 2 core dilemmas of environmental management. How should vulnerable communities hold public agencies accountable for environmental injustice? And how should public agencies incorporate the demands of vulnerable stakeholders? So thank you, Earthia, for joining us here. Okay, and next to Earthia is Emily Warren from the Cynthia and George. She's the water program officer at the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, which is doing great things here in the state of Texas. Emily is the water program officer there, and for more than 20 years you have worked making connections between science and policy, providing the science that supports natural resource management decisions. You've been at the foundation, did you say a couple years now?
5 months.
For 5?
5 months.
Oh, for 5 months. Okay. Before this job, you were at the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment, and you're the Principal Manager for Center Strategy and Programs. So Emily, thank you for joining us here. Great. And right next to me is Kathleen, and Kathleen Jackson is a board member of the Texas Water Development Board. A lot of you have heard about the statewide plan. You're on the board at the center of this. You're a registered professional engineer. You're an appointee of the governor, Governor Abbott, to the Texas Water Development Board, which is the agency responsible for planning and developing and conserving water resources. And you told me you had a long career in industry before taking on this easy job at the board. So, thank you, Kathleen. So I would like to start by giving you a couple minutes to tell me and us to tell a story. The currency of folks like us is stories, and I think you all have really interesting stories to tell to kind of illustrate what you're doing here. Spencer, we heard from the mayor a little bit about what happened in Austin and the flood, but can you tell a little bit more about your experience? We spoke about what it looked like and how that flood and the record drought 8 years before make the case for this city looking 100 years into the future.
Great. Well, echo the mayor's comments on just welcoming you to Austin, Texas. It's a beautiful city, and I'm so honored to have you be hosted here in this environment. It is true that as a city manager, the last thing that you want to be thinking about is to tell 1 million of the residents of your city to not drink out of the tap water, and that's exactly what happened in October of last year. We had historic flooding like we've never seen before, and just to give you some perspective, the amount of water that was coming down the Llano River, which feeds into the Texas-Colorado River, which is our water supply, was 4 times the volume of Niagara Falls. And so if you can think about Niagara Falls, and I'm sure many of you have been there, but 4 times that was the amount of volume coming into the Colorado River. And that did sweep up an incredible amount of sediment and silt, and it did overwhelm our treatment facilities. And so we had to be very thoughtful and to think on our feet, and fortunately we have incredible staff here at the City of Austin and our water utility, but we were able to communicate with our residents and ensuring that they had the information that they needed to be careful and safe and to conserve the amount of water that we needed.
And you talked to me about what it looked like, the swirling water. Did you say it looked like a milkshake or something?
I was describing it as kind of a Wendy's Frosty. And so if you've seen that type of color, but you can't even imagine. I mean, you think about Barton Springs and the beautiful streams that come into the Colorado River, and that in contrast with what's coming down up from upstream, and it is just, kind of night and day, the blue and the dark brown silt that we were seeing, but it was the consistency of a Wendy's Frosty. And the ability for our treatment facilities to get through that level, and we had increased turbidity levels that we did have to tell our residents about.
So looking forward, there has been, you've talked about the flood, we're going to talk a little bit more about the drought in 2011, but how do these extreme events here in Austin, and this is a state, right, that has a lot of different extremes, how does it kind of make the case for, this is a city that needs to plan for the day after tomorrow?
Well, we have been fortunate that we've had so many incredible community members and the people, advocates, partners at the state and local level focused on this. So this isn't the first time that Austin has had an extreme event related to water. And we knew that we needed to continue that focus. And so the Water Forward Plan, which is a 100-year vision about how we can become more resilient, was through that grassroots community effort. And so I think that it wasn't one specific case, it wasn't even this flooding back in October, it was the need for decades that we have had to focus on this, but we have had to bring in different partners and to make sure that we're moving forward in the same direction.
Great, thank you. Kathleen, let me turn to you and ask you to tell me a little bit of a story about the drought of 2011 and how you personally, how that kind of prompted you to get into this business in the first place.
Well, first, I just wanted to kind of recognize the excitement and the energy in the room, and just thank everyone that's here for your engagement and for your leadership. And please know how much it makes a difference to water world and to our ability to kind of move forward and to plan for the future and to build for the future. Texas and the Texas Water Development Board really kind of came about after the drought of the 50s, when people across the state said, we'll never, ever, ever let this happen again. We'll never let Texas run out of water. And so they formed the Texas Water Development Board and basically kind of gave us 3 charges. First of all, as the engineer on the board, I will tell you that we are the data repository for all water data for Texas. And that's so important from a science standpoint, that information be available, if you will, in its raw format, so that if you're working on a new project or if there's a study and you can draw your own conclusions. So that information needs to be available so that we can have it, because we know that the better the data, the better the science, the better the science, the better the policy. We're also a bank. We were given the kind of the charge to help fund water infrastructure projects across our state. And so it was so important because we knew that in order to be able to invest in infrastructure, in order to be able to invest in wastewater treatment and make sure that we had the water supplies that we needed, there needed to be the tools available, not just from the planning and from the science, but also from the financing. The other thing that the board was charged with, and I think has been extremely successful with, is planning. And so we do a statewide water plan. We do it every 5 years. There are 450 volunteers across the state that come from agriculture, they come from big cities and small communities. They all come together and say, what do we have today? What do we need for the future? And what are those strategies or projects that will get us there? And then very, very fortunate, recently the state legislature provided some funding to actually implement projects in the state water plan. So we're making great progress. There's much more to be done, but certainly lots of effort that's been gone and lots of things that have been done over time within Texas.
So let me ask you about how the drought, the record drought in the 1950s, is kind of woven into the planning of this 50-year plan. Now, that's one of the policy assumptions. Is that right? Is that if the state is in one of these situations again, this is how we're going to plan for it?
So the part of what I think is so important is that we plan for the drought of record. And so a big part of what we do is each of the regional water planning groups, each of the 16 groups, looks at population growth. They look at what things have changed. They look at what the climate conditions have been in the past, what the growth is and what the expected need is, what the opportunities are from all different types of water supply. So it's not just surface water from building reservoirs, it's also desalination, it's also reuse, and it's also conservation, which is, we know from water planning, is something that communities value, because the least expensive water that you have is the water that you already have. And so there's a huge expectation, I think, across Texas to utilize that resource and to build out and upgrade your aging infrastructure in order to be able to capture and to kind of focus on water conservation.
Thanks. Well, and we'll talk more about long-term planning and the role of the board. Earthia, let me ask you to talk a little bit about these discussions have stakeholders and they involve trade-offs in some cases. I want you to tell me a little bit of a story about what happened in Harris County in Houston following Harvey. I know you didn't lead it, but you were an observer when the county had to divvy up more than $2 billion and there was a critical measure on equity that passed. Can you tell the rest of us who don't know the story what happened and what does this tell you about the system?
Thank you very much. I want to start out by thanking the U.S. Water Alliance and Radhika and your team. I attended a boot camp with some other representatives of Houston a few months ago, and that's how I got started attending these events, and I just wanted to give thanks to that before I started. So something that I think is really important went down in Houston recently that has to do with equity. And water equity is the future of water. And so thank you. And so the leaders of that are in the room. There were several leaders. I participated as a volunteer. And as an academic, I'm always observing. So this idea of equity was brought up when there was a bond that people voted for after Hurricane Harvey. And it won. So we passed this bond, $2.5 billion, big bond to put money together for mitigation, flood mitigation, and infrastructure projects. And included in the language was this idea of equity, even though it had not been explained very well, but this idea of equity was attempted. And at first it was actually rejected. There was a big fight about it at first with our county leader. And after that, there was this period of advocacy, building, base building, collaboration between the local grassroots groups and the county staff that went on, and I participated in some of that. And this was really strategizing on how can we really get equity in a real way, in an authentic way, to be part of how the decision-making goes down in spending that $2.5 billion. Because business as usual, there's been some pretty disproportionate outcomes in infrastructure spending. There were disproportionate outcomes in who got affected and hurt by the storm and who could not recover by the storm, even though the floodwaters did affect everybody. But that outcome and that recovery was disproportionate. And so after literally months of discussions, meetings, and how to write a resolution, it came to the day to vote on that resolution. And the grassroots groups had done a really good job in bringing together community members from all parts of the city to speak and to advocate for the equity proposition. We had people on the commissioner's court also speaking in support, but there was still an opposition to it. There was another side. And so the part of this story that was what stuck with me the most was that the chief engineer of the flood control, the county flood control department, he spoke. And this changed everything when he spoke. And he was very, he simply said, my peers are doing this.
Sorry, what is it?
He said, my peers in other cities, other engineering departments are seriously adopting an equity perspective in making decisions because of those disproportionate outcomes. And he just said that. And then he said, equity is the future of water. That was what he said. And you could just hear a pin drop. This is the chief of flood control saying that. Yes, thank you. And his name is Russ Poppy, let's call him. His name is Russ Poppy.
Yeah, and briefly, what did the provision that eventually passed, what did it do? How did it change the allocation?
So it passed 3-2, so we have work to do. It was not unanimous. It should have been unanimous. People voted against equity. And so, but we got it, we won. And so now the work goes to that chief engineer and his staff, who is working with the same groups, the community groups and the grassroots groups, to do the next step of implementation. So yes, it's going forward.
Scott,
okay.
just
Yes,
to continue to build off that, I mean, how powerful rooms like this are to make sure that you have those conversations so that you can understand exactly what is happening in different jurisdictions. I mean, to have that sentiment coming saying, this isn't just me saying this is me with a lot of people behind me that are doing similar work in other jurisdictions. We know this work is hard, but we're doing it together.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And correct me if this is, I believe when we spoke on the phone, if this hadn't passed, then the allocation of the money would have been based largely on property value, that more of the money would have gone to places with higher property values. Is that how it would have gone?
Well, okay, so the business as usual is often based on a benefit cost analysis, which uses property value as a major component of how much benefit you're going to get.
Yeah, okay.
And so there is plenty of research that does show that leads to disproportionate outcomes.
Great, okay, thank you. Emily, let me turn to you, and I know you have a couple stories to tell, but can you talk a little bit about your recollections of the 2011 drought? You mentioned that when we spoke by phone a little bit. I mean, you write and you think about policy inertia and policy silos. How did that event, the drought and the flood, in your view, kind of pushed the state of Texas and the city of Austin toward a conversation where we have to be less reactive.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me. Thank you to Radhika for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very excited to be here. And it's really reflecting what Kathleen said. So after the 2011 drought, the state of Texas said, what can we do? What is going on here? The 2011 drought was as severe or more severe in parts of Texas than the 1950s drought. And so one of the things that we all recognized was that we were not funding the state water plan in a way to be more resilient in the face of drought. And so the state of Texas, the voters decided to fund parts, not all of it, but parts, the major parts of the state water plan, which was significant. And then in terms of the most recent floods last year or a couple years ago, again, the state of Texas just really rallies around like crisis. You know, we respond. We're amazing at that. And so one of the areas where the foundation can really play a role is in between a crisis and the policy. There's a significant amount of time between that. It's years sometimes. A foundation and many foundations can kind of rally around what can we do in the meantime? Where can we support positive or well-informed policy decisions? So for example, after the Hurricane Harvey, the Mitchell Foundation, the Houston Endowment, and the Kinder Foundation got together and were like, what can we do as philanthropies to help and figure out a way not to, you know, what can we do? What can we do? So they asked all of the great minds in Houston and around the greater Houston area to come together, and Arthea was one of these folks as part of this greater Houston flood mitigation consortium to think about what are we missing? What is the data? What are the equity issues that the city is facing? And that's sort of the role that we can play.
And tell me a little bit more about what you mean by philanthropy supporting. I mean, is it when there's this window and part of the conversation needs to be amplified, or it needs more data, or part of the conversation needs a report or something? Talk a little bit about how, from a philanthropic point of view, you can support this reframing that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's all of those things. So I think that philanthropy can really play this tremendous role in being really nimble, seeing some of those issues that a state agency can't do. Like maybe because of the enabling laws, the Texas Water Development Board can't study something, where that's really what a foundation can do and support organizations that might have like a risky or a big idea. And that's where a foundation can maybe support those riskier ideas.
Great. Okay. So let me
Can I cut in on that?
Yes, sir.
She's actually right, and because I was on that consortium, I can say behind the scenes, there were times when we challenged the status quo. We challenged public officials to think a different way about certain things and to support the recommendations that we were making. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, great.
So I
Thank
think
you.
if we ask ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, how do we get there? How are we successful? It's this diversity of thought. And so having philanthropy, having people who have a social consciousness, having people who are boots on the ground and know how things work, bringing all of those folks together, having those conversations, but also putting planning together, and then having the resources to turn the planning into projects, recognizing that it's not just the big cities, it's the small communities. If one small community in Texas is out of water, then Texas is out of water. If one small community is faced with flood and is not prepared. So we're really at a very, kind of at a crossroads in Texas. We've dealt with drought. I mean, we're a state that is in perpetual drought, punctuated by times of flood. And so right now we're marching forward with the first ever state flood plan and thinking that, you know, the opportunities that we have to kind of build on with what we've drawn on from community engagement, from diversity of thought, and from engineering expertise is really going to help us to be successful.
Great. And so I want to ask Spencer a little bit more about the challenges of long-term planning, right? We've used words like engagement and voices and stakeholders. Another word for this is politics, right? These are scarce resources here. And it is inherently, right, in an American system, rewarding short-term thinking. That's the rational way to think about it. So, Spencer, how is it going to get challenging in the city of Austin that is trying to hold off these resources for a century? How are these decisions going to be tough decisions going forward?
Yeah. No, it's a great question because on some level, planning is an important process, but it's also a plan. And so you have to know where you're going. You have to have the appropriate level of engagement to make sure that that plan is the direction you want to be taking. But there are those day-to-day incremental steps, and they often come back to resource allocation. And so whether it's impacting your utility rates, whether it's discussions within your local units of government on how you're going to allocate those resources, these are big numbers that we're talking about when we look at infrastructure improvement projects, ways that we can provide more assets to our system. And those happen on a day-to-day basis, and that's when the rubber hits the road. So I'm very proud of the work that we did with the 100-year plan, but I also know that the real work of making some of these decisions is coming up in the next several years. And those are the decisions that we will have to say. Those are the trade-offs of saying, there might be some areas where we know that we have some great infrastructure in place, even though it might be needed. Over here is where it's really needed because we have neglected those areas for decades.
Yeah. And is there something about the structure of the process that allows for this long-term question to be more of a prominent one?
What I appreciate about having the plan in place is that you know where you want to be going. And so you can always point back to, we're making this decision, we know it's a tough decision, but it's allowing us to get to here. And having those baby steps, those incremental steps along the way is really critical to get there.
Yeah, great. Urthia, I want to ask you about a book you wrote about long-term planning and water access in Brazil, and what perhaps we all can learn about what you wrote about there. This is a place that had significant access problems. A lot of people didn't have access to it. So just, I guess, very, very briefly, what did the actors decide in a way to provide sewer services to people? And what can we extract from that as far as this is an example of kind of long-term planning that actually worked?
So put yourself in the early 1980s in Brazil, in the northeast Brazil, extreme poverty like you've never seen unless you've traveled the world, then you've seen it, but if you've never, then you can't imagine. Only 20% of the population has running water and sanitation. And so this is a situation where just a small handful of engineers, they couldn't stand that. They didn't want to be part of a country or a city that allowed that to happen, and that's their profession. And so they stepped out of their profession a little bit and started a movement. And they created a new technology. They collaborated with grassroots groups, and they collaborated with people outside their profession, including planners, sociologists, architects, and just worked side by side to come up with ways to engage the community around the new technology. In some cases, they ran for office so they could change the policies to make it possible to serve 80% of their population. And they're still doing this today. Today, this technology and this approach that they created is extremely popular now. It's no longer illegal as it was at first. Many of the biggest cities in Brazil are using it. It's become the norm. It's now counted in the census. It's legally okay, and it's going outside of the country. It's going to be covering most of Latin America as well as other parts of the world. So the World Bank is taking it all over the place.
Right, and you've described it as condominial.
It's called condominial sewers. It's also used for water.
Right, so in its most basic form,
This is an example.
What does it do? Yeah,
this
how does
is
it work?
it's just a lower cost system that involves the community. It's a community engagement approach, and as well as a low cost technology and engineers who are willing to make it happen and to be more than engineers. Mm-hmm. That's the point, is that's what's happening. When that happens, some of these major transformations can happen in terms of access and equity. We have a role to play. It's not something that happens just politicians or people who are activists. We can do that, and we have the country of Brazil did that in that sector, water and sanitation sector.
Yeah, great. Okay, Emily. I want to ask you about another moment around the world. We spoke on the phone, and you mentioned the lessons to extract from the Cape Town situation, where they, came this close to a water emergency. And we've talked here about crises being opportunities that the city of Austin and the state of Texas have grabbed. But what, in your view, are the salient lessons of a place very far away, the Cape Town experience, and how that should inform long-term planning here in the U.S.?
Well, Cape Town should serve as a sort of cautionary tale for all of us here in our country, because I think any one of our cities could face similar really severe shortages if we're not thinking about the future, and if we're not really considering all of the mechanisms in which we can start conserving. And one of the things that is so amazing to me is that once the population, the citizens learned, okay, well, you're going to run out of water in 30 days, they're like, oh man, what should we do? And they agreed, or they started conserving, and they started using so much less, that's not English, but less water, to the point where that date started getting pushed forward, and then it got pushed forward, and then it started to rain, thank God, and then and so they avoided a severe crisis. But I think that the idea that we don't have to be in crisis. We can do great conservation if we're willing, if our population is educated and understands the severity or values our water in the way that we really should. And for those of us, it's interesting. I was listening to, I think it was the San Antonio Water Systems Director talk about, his job is really to make sure that when somebody turns on the tap, there's water coming out. But at the same time, what happens is that people then don't think about where that water is coming from. And so it's that double-edged sword between, the utilities have to provide water, and yet we do it to the point where it's so easy that our people don't know where our water comes from. So.
Yeah, right, and that brings me to the business reporter's question about price that any of you can jump into. I was asked, we did a series on water on Marketplace about 5 years ago, and I was asked, okay, I want you to, my editor said, track the Tong family's use of water for 24 hours. So first I had to look for where the water meter was. I didn't know where it was, right? So in front of our driveway in Arlington, Virginia. And then I went to our bus stop, and I said, I have no idea how much water we use in a day. And I just want to guess, right, how many gallons we use in a day. And one person said 30 gallons, and on the other end of the range, someone said 5,000 gallons. And I said, well, we'll see, right? And so I spent a day with a microphone, and I started to kind of tally it. And it exploded during the laundry part of the day, right, with an old machine. And in the end, family of 5, used 310 gallons of water. I said, wow, that's about a ton of water. And then somebody said, it's actually 1.15 tons of water. And so how much, right, how much did we get charged for that? It was $1.30, a bottle of water, right? That's how much the 5 of us not knowing the value and perhaps being too distant from the price because of that. Now, there has been a lot of conversation about whether water is priced the right way to reflect its scarcity. One behavioral economist, Dan Ariely at Duke, he did an experiment with his students, short-term and long-term, and he charged them for pizza. He charged them 1 bite at a time, like 25 cents per bite. And so they consumed about a quarter of what they consumed when he charged them afterwards. And so with water, we get charged afterwards, right? And so I just kind of want to put the question to you as far as this price question. Now, it has to interact with the equity and access question. But in your view, where is the important conversation about whether water is priced appropriately? Any of you? Spencer.
Well, I'll speak specifically to management because Kathleen mentioned this before on how do we make sure that we are doing everything from the utilities perspective to better educate our customers, our community, about what they are actually using. And so just as you had that exercise with your family, how do we provide the tools in which we can have individual residents, individual customers look at in a real-time way how much they're consuming and then what it costs to consume that. And so I'm really proud of the work that our water utility here in Austin is doing to make that hit home quicker. And so you do have real-time management solutions that are on the way. But that is so true that we just don't necessarily think about it. And as we're seeing climate change, the pressures on our water supplies, we have a responsibility to provide those tools so everyone in our environment can see exactly what they're using and be part of the solution.
And so one question is being aware of how much it costs. The underlying price, in your view, is it in the right place?
Well, it's going to, as I mentioned before, as we look at our 100-year plan and the investments that we're going to make, that is going to impact our rates. And so as we look to very big infrastructure improvements to create reservoirs, to create other alternatives besides our only drinking supply right now is the Colorado River, we have got to diversify and provide more resiliency, and that will ultimately be charged to our customers.
Yeah, great. Okay, Earthia.
So water is a human right, and so there should be a base amount of water that everybody gets. And then for those who want to use a lot more, they will have to pay for that.
Yep.
And then people who had lead in their water were paying for that. So we're really not even close. It's beyond price. It's like, how do you include the humanity part of it in that too? So it's a complex.
Yeah.
I
Great.
think we've
Any
got
other thoughts,
a lot of
Kathleen?
success stories across Texas, and of course Austin is one. If it's important enough to be concerned about, which water definitely is, then it's important enough to measure. And so what we're seeing is communities actively investing in measuring how much water they use. And it's not just from a billing standpoint to make it easier to send out the water bill, but what we're seeing is that people are driven by how it impacts me. And so if they can see their water bill, if they can actually go online, and many communities can now, and see their water usage, and then they can also see maybe how they're compared with their neighbor, then they start taking more personal responsibility. In terms of price, it's going to be important, to not only consider the measurement aspect of it, but also the investment long-term that we're going to need to have future water supplies, and also to maintain our aging infrastructure. So communities have to be forward-thinking. They have to think not only about that next gallon of water and what it's going to cost them, but also investing in their aging infrastructure, if you will, to keep the water molecules inside the pipeline. So we have cities across Texas that have really taken this to heart. Austin has with their commitment to move forward and work with the board. We provide the tools to help not just the big cities, but the small communities go in and upgrade their aging infrastructure, and oftentimes provide them with a new water well. We have an initiative right now that's ongoing called Securing Safe Water. We know that water quality is something that's an issue, and particularly targeting that to small and rural and disadvantaged communities. So important that we not only have a reliable and dependable water supply for the big cities, but also for the small communities and everyone across Texas.
And I want to ask you a little bit more about investing. Most people in this room, I imagine, know that the American Society of Civil Engineers has projected that water infrastructure needs nearly $5 trillion in investment over the next 20 years. So here in the state of Texas, what is an argument that has been made well to jurisdictions to make the case that this costs real money and you have to find it, but this is the case to do this instead of something else?
Well, I think, we're really fortunate in Texas because you mentioned the American Society of Civil Engineers, and the Texas section has taken a very active role, not only in putting together this scorecard and estimating what the expense is moving forward, but also kind of working, very deliberately on those things that will help to improve the grade. And so I think what we know is that, it's so important that we take advantage of the low interest rates that we have right now, that we be proactive rather than reactive. So much better to go out and repair something, in your time and putting it out in a way that you can afford it, as opposed to getting the phone call in the middle of the night. And I think communities are recognizing that. I think that they're really searching for, how can I convince people that this investment is impactful? And I think that's a huge maybe charge and an opportunity that people who are champions, within One Water, can really bring to the table. If people understand how it directly impacts them. I mean, in Texas, it's a bottom-up process. Nobody tells Texans what to do. And so we have a bottom-up planning process, but we also have a bottom-up implementation process. So you can have the money and you can have the technology, but it's up to the local leadership to come together and to get these water projects moving forward, these wastewater treatment plants projects moving forward. So important that, I think communities understand, how does this impact me? How is going out and investing today going to actually make things better, more reliable, and quite frankly, more cost-effective for the future?
Yeah, okay. Emily, I want to ask you a little bit more about, Kathleen, you've all talked about stakeholders and different voices in the conversation. You and I have talked about climate change and climate change projections. And I mean, the broader question is, whose voice is missing, in your view, or all of your views, in the conversation? As far as the projections for future generations and what may happen with more frequent events, less predictable events, is that voice, is that concern, in your view, adequately reflected in the conversation here in the city, here in the state?
To quote Dr. Bullard, no, it's not. I just, and I'll elaborate a little bit. The people that are most affected and will be most affected in terms of climate change and water and access to water will be people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and people of color in our state, and our state is currently changed. It is a majority-minority state. We are a state that does not include those voices in any of our planning, I don't think, not adequately. Although there's cities like Houston that are doing an amazing job to do that. I think Austin has a long way to go, but I think you're trying really hard to be inclusive in those voices and bringing those together. And San Antonio, again, there's some shining stars, but those are the major cities. Think about the rest of the state. I mean, where is everybody else? Where are those voices in planning? And so, I don't have a solution. I think that's what we're all here for, and really being mindful about ensuring that's.
Well, how do you incorporate these projections, these models, into the process? Is it a matter of the assumptions that go into the projections, that go into the planning? How do you bring it in?
That is another excellent question. It's been my thought that we've done a really great job, again, being reactionary, and we've got this wonderful state water plan that is bottom up, but as Kathleen mentioned, it is based on the 1950s drought as the drought of record, and that is kind of the baseline of what we think is going to be the worst case scenario in our state. But our projections obviously show that we're going to have much deeper, longer droughts in the future. And so rethinking about how we manage water at the state level is something that I would love nothing more than we could really head in that direction.
Okay, Earthia, quickly, and then I'll ask you.
Okay, no matter how well organized we are, there's always people on the outside of that. I'm thinking about the colonias lately, that they're not included in anything. So that's in the back of my mind. And then a good decision maker will look at the algorithms, the equations, the benefit-cost analysis. Of course, you can't make a decision without that. But that's not the only part of the decision. It's a human decision. And so you include the math and the economics, but then you also include the other factors, the social factors and others, so that you're making the right decision. So that's how you can include those,
Yeah.
both of those.
And as we conclude, I mean, that's a great call to action of just how we individually in our roles, the responsibility that we have to bring more folks to the table and to look at the other pieces of that decision-making process that may be outside of what we were taught or what we normally think about.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
So
in
I
the-
would just tell you that as I travel
Yes.
around the state, what I see
I'm wrapping
is,
up just as it gets going good.
but I see a very caring Texas. I mean, I see people that look out for one another, and they look out for the small communities. They look out for the disadvantaged communities. I mean, and they've invested as a state for communities that maybe didn't have first-time water supply. They didn't have first-time sewer. And, they've gone in and they've made sure that those communities have what they need. Is there more work to be done? Yes. But there are great examples across Texas and the work that communities have done in conjunction with the Water Development Board in helping communities to become more reliant and more self-sufficient. And the really exciting thing to see is as these economically disadvantaged communities kind of get, if you will, kind of this skeleton infrastructure, that they grow and they expand and their economic status changes. And so it provides almost this ray of hope and this ability to kind of move forward and to make things better. And I think that's kind of what we all want. I mean, we want to see change, and we want to see positive change, and we want to see that our investment is meaningful. And from what I've seen in terms of what we've done across Texas, in terms of helping small communities and the work that our staff has done, it's definitely making a difference. Is there more work to be done? Yes. But there's lots of great examples, I think, in terms of engagement and helping communities that, again, kind of pull themselves up and become able to do the kind of things that they want to do for their children and their children's children.
Okay, final word to each of you. We've talked about a lot of things. I'll start with Spencer and then come down. Can you give all of us a line or two on the most important takeaway you want to leave us?
Keep going. I mean, this is hard work, and we know that we need to rely on each other to continue this progress. Just focus on those small steps, but keep the big picture in mind. This is really, really important work for our future, and I just want to thank each of you for everything that you do for our community.
Great. Ruthia, please.
Water equity is the future of water.
Emily.
We should have ended on Earthia, but I would say just don't forget about the unintended consequences. Don't forget about rural communities. Don't forget about the environment. Don't forget about people of color and people who are disadvantaged.
Yeah, great. And the last word, Kathleen, to you.
I would just say make it real. I mean, I think that if people can kind of see themselves, if they can understand how it impacts me and how it impacts my family and my friends and the people that I care about, then they're going to take action. And that's really, I think, the greatest challenge. I mean, we can get the money. The technology is evolving, but at the end of the day, it's up to leadership. It's up to people kind of feeling that there's a case for action, there's a reason to move forward, and the people who can affect that change are the powerful messengers that are in this room, because you are people that others look toward for your advice and your counsel. Most people are, they're so busy in their daily lives, they just want to get home, get supper on the table, get the homework done with the kids. But they look to you so the extent that you can make it real, you can bring it home in terms of how does that directly impact me? I truly believe in my heart that people want to do the right thing. They care about one another. And if they know and they understand that, they're going to move forward and they're going to be, continue to be, I think, the positive action that we're seeing, not just across Texas, but across our nation.
Great. Well, there's your commission. And please join me in thanking our great panel.
Good job.
Much appreciated.
Great job.
Okay, great. Yep.